Hey, started.
Okay. Om Yo Brahmanam Vidadhati Purvam Yo Vai Vedanscha Prahinoti Tasmai Tam Hadevam Atmabuddhi Prakasham Mumukshurvai Sharanamaham Prapadye Asato Ma Satgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 गुरुर्ब्रह्मा गुरुर्विष्णुः गुरुर्देवो महेश्वरः गुरुर्साक्षात् परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। गुरवे सर्वलोकानां भिषजे भवरोगिणां निधये सर्वविद्यानां श्रीदक्षिणामूर्तये नमः। Last week we stopped at 356. We start from 357. Okay, so any questions from anyone, or can we straight away go to the shloka? No?
We can go to
Right.
shloka.
Okay. So let us read the shloka. I'll share my screen. I have not yet shared my screen. Okay. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Is it big enough for you?
Yes, sir.
Right. So, upadhi bhedat
Upadhi bhedat
उपाधिभेदात्
swayameva bhidyate
स्वयमेव
swayameva
भिद्यते
chopadhyapohe
चोपाध्यपोहे
upadhyapohe
swayameva kevalah
स्वयमेव
swayameva
केवलः
kevalah
tasmad upadhehe
तस्मात्
tasmat
उपाधेः
upadhehe
vilayaya vidwan
विलयाय
vilayaya
विद्वान्
vidvan
वसेत् सदा कल्पसमाधिनिष्ठया।
वसेत् सदा
vaset sada
कल्पसमाधिनिष्ठयः
kalpasamadhisthaya.
It's a little difficult to split, so it had to be read in one shot. So, upadhi bhedat swayameva bhidyate chopadhyapohe swayameva kevalah tasmad upadher vilayaya vidwan vaset sada kalpasamadhi nishtaya. Okay, so we are seeing in these shlokas the exponentiation or the explanation of the Vididhyasanam using the Nirvikalpa Samadhi as the method. So we saw that there are different ways of doing Nididhyasanam, and for people with some very acute habitual issues which cannot be resolved through the other normal Nididhyasanam process, the Acharya recommends this Samadhi Abhyasa based Nididhyasana. And so the how to do that, what do you do in that Samadhi, what are the benefits? So these are going to be the points that we will see in this shloka. So here in this shloka he says Upadhi bhedat swayameva bhidyate. So upadhi translated, it just means superimposition, but here the word superimposition should be understood as the body as in the physical body, the pranamaya kosha, the manomaya kosha, all the five koshas, they are all basically superimposed on the atma. And why is it superimposed on the atma? Because these are not really connected to the atma in any way. They appear to be connected, but they are really speaking not connected. So what this sloka really then says is that all the differences that we see between the individuals in this world, the differences are all based on the body. For instance, our what is it called? Retina scan. If you do a retina scan, no two individuals will have the exact same retina scan. Similarly, no two individuals will have the exact same fingerprint. So these are all very unique identifiers for every person. There are today, I think there are 8 billion or 9 billion people in this world. So imagine if 9 billion people have to have some kind of a unique identification, and no two people's fingerprint or retina scan is identical. That shows how intricate the differences within the bodies are. Even if you have two twins, identical twins, even the identical twins will not have the same fingerprint or retina scan. So that is the level of distinction the physical body can give. But underlying all of this, it is all one Atma, one Paramatma, on which all these bodies are floating. So that is the second line. Upadhi apohe swayameva kevalaha. So once you realize through the teaching that all these superimpositions of the bodies are incidental, that is not a true identity, you understand that the underlying Atma or the consciousness is exactly the same. This one and the same Atma which is present in everybody's body. That is Swayameva Kevalaha. Kevalaha means the one and only one. Kevalaha means only one. There is no second. And that is also why we have this term Advaitam. Advaitam means there is only one entity in this whole creation. There is no second entity. All the other so-called second entities and third entities are all illusions. That is the Swayameva Kevalaha. Okay. Tasmad upadhehe vilayaya vidwan vaset sada kalpa samadhi nishtaya. Sada akalpa samadhi nishtaya. So what needs to be done in this akalpa samadhi, which is nothing but nirvikalpa samadhi. So the word akalpa samadhi and nirvikalpa samadhi are synonymous. So vidwan, the word vidwan means one who has gone through Shravanam and Mananam, and one who is now pursuing Nididhyasanam. So that vidwan, vaset means he has to remain in. He has to spend a lot of time in that samadhi avastha, nirvikalpa samadhi avastha, and in that samadhi avastha, it is not a thoughtless state. So unlike the samadhi that the yoga people talk about, where they talk about thoughtless state, blank state of the mind, the Vedantic approach to samadhi is not a blank mind. The Vedantic approach to samadhi is that you repeat one or another mantra that the Advaita Vedanta teaches you, and the repetition of this mantra in that deep state of samadhi will result in a sukshma vritti. A sukshma vritti is nothing but a very subtle background thought process that keeps on ringing in your mind even after you have consciously stopped the meditation. Even after you stop the meditation, in its own momentum, this mantra that you were repeating will keep ringing at the back of your mind, and that will create a very deep impact in the way your thought process itself is driven. And you can see this change happening very gradually over a long period of time. It could be several weeks, several months. In some cases, it could even be several years. But the important point is to continue this practice consistently and regularly for a significant length of time every day, depending on how much time you can allocate. It could be 15 minutes, it could be half an hour. And it is not necessary that you reach that nirvikalpa state. Even if you don't reach the nirvikalpa state, even if you are just doing a conscious meditation, which is called a savikalpa meditation, even that meditation will produce the necessary effect. I don't know how many of you have taken part in these Nama Sankirtan bhajans. There are a lot of occasions where people chant either Om Namo Narayanaya or Om Namah Shivaya or some such mantra repeatedly. They'll just take one short mantra and they will chant that for several hours. And if you visit any of these ISKCON temples, or if you meet any ISKCON devotee, they are supposed to do this Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare mantra japam some 1008 times every day. Okay, and so many of them will carry a small bag with a japamala, and they will keep on meditating even as they are doing something. So even in that kind of meditation, what happens? This mantra that you are doing for that japam will tend to reverberate in your mind on its own after some practice. So that is also some kind of a samadhi state. It may not be a nirvikalpa samadhi state, because in the nirvikalpa samadhi state, your the mantra's repetition is outside of your volition. You don't do it with your conscious intent, it just keeps happening at the background. So that is the nirvikalpa samadhi. Okay, so why do we call it nirvikalpa? Vikalpa means a division or multitude. And what is this multitude we are talking about? We are talking about, just a minute. Yeah, see, in any thought process, there are three entities involved, or I would say in any transaction. Let us make it very general. In any transaction, when I say transaction, it could be a visual transaction of seeing, it could be an auditory transaction of listening to something, or it could be the tasting transaction of eating something. All transactions, there are three entities. One is the doer, the other is the object, which is the object of action, the person performing the action, the object of action, and the process of acting. So in Sanskrit we call it karta, karanam, karma. Karta means the one who is doing, karma means the object of the action, and karma is the process itself, or we can say the instrument of that action. So if you are seeing a visible optical action, we call that seer, seen, and the seeing instrument, which is the eye. If it is a listening action, it is the listener, the listening sound, and the listening instrument of the ear. Similarly, in the thinking process also, you have the thinker, the thought, and the thinking instrument, which is the mind. Okay, now so this is called a triputi. In Sanskrit we give it a word, it is called triputi. So in every transaction there is a triputi involved. And in nirvikalpa samadhi, what happens? The thinker withdraws, because you are no longer thinking about that mantra with your volition. So the thinker has withdrawn, and because there is no conscious thinking process, the thinking instrument has withdrawn, and it is only the thought which you are entertaining that remains. So that is the nirvikalpa part. So nirvikalpa means, don't imagine that there is some separate state in which you go and all that. It just means that the thought keeps ringing in your mind without the thinker doing any active thinking process. That is the nirvikalpa state. Okay, so vaset sada akalpa samadhi nishtaya. So if the vidwan, if the nididhyasaka is able to manage this state of the mind, upadhehe vilayaya, then the upadhi, the division about the experienced division in the world, will stop becoming a reality. So the vilayaya means, the vilayam really means disappearance or dissolution. But here you should understand the word dissolution correctly. It is not that you will stop seeing the differences. You will continue to see the differences, but you will not attribute any reality to that division. So you will know that this is nothing but Brahman. It is the appearance of Brahman, which is now I am seeing as a tree or as a car or as a building or as the moon and all that. So that intellectual appreciation of the oneness of the universe is what is called upadhehe vilayam here. Okay, that is 357. Okay, was that clear?
Yes, very much. Very nicely explained.
Right. Thank you. Can we move on to 358?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
358. Satisakto naro yati
Sati
Sati
Satisakto naro yati
sadbhavam
tadbhavam
Sadbhavam
hekanishthaya.
ekanishthaya
Ekanishthaya.
Hekanishthaya. That ya is long.
ekanishthaya
Eknishtaya.
Kitako bhramaram dhyayan
Kitako brahmanam dhyayan
Dhyayan
bhramarattvaya kalpate.
brahmaratvaya kalpate.
Satisakto naro yati sadbhavam hekanishthaya kitako bhramaram dhyayan bhramarattvaya kalpate. So this shloka introduces an example which will be elaborated in the next shloka. Here the shloka merely introduces the example. So what is this example? In the Vedantic field or even in the general Shastric field, it is called the Bhramara Kita Nyaya. Bhramara Kita Nyaya. What is a Bhramara? A Bhramara is a wasp. 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 And Kita is a worm. Okay, so this is something that the Shastras talk about. I don't know whether it is actually observed in reality, whether there is any biological scientific proof for this happening, we don't know, but it is very often quoted in the Shastra. So what is that example? Apparently, the wasp sometimes captures a worm and brings it to the nest, and it keeps that worm as a captive, not for eating. It is not going to eat the worm, but it is going to keep the worm as some kind of a hostage, like a kidnapper keeps the hostage, no? So the worm is kept as a hostage by this wasp. And obviously the wasp doesn't like this situation, so it tries to escape. So whenever the worm tries to wriggle out of the wasp's grip, apparently the wasp will give it a sting. No, the wasp has a very deadly sting. Okay, and so when the sting happens, the worm experiences a lot of pain because the sting injects a small droplet of a poison or some kind of a chemical that the wasp has. So every time the worm tries to escape and try to get out of this control of the wasp, it gets a sting, and it is very closely guarded by the wasp. So there is no way it can escape. So what happens? Apparently, the worm starts thinking about the wasp all the time, not out of love but out of fear, because it doesn't know when the next sting will come. So the worm is totally engrossed in the wasp, thinking about the wasp. So what the Shastris say is that apparently at some point the worm transforms itself into a wasp. That is the Brahmarakita Nyaya. So because of the constant meditation of the wasp, the worm becomes a wasp. Okay, so this is quoted as an example. Now, there is a saying, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your action.
Action.
Watch your actions, they become your habit. Watch your habits, they become your character. And watch your character, for it becomes your destiny. So this is some kind of a saying, maxim. That means whatever you think, that eventually shapes your personality. So apparently this happens in the case of the worm also. The worm keeps on thinking about the wasp and it eventually becomes the wasp. Okay, now this is an example part. We don't know if it really happens, but we use this example to tell the sadhakas that if you keep on meditating upon Brahman, at some point you become Brahman itself. Okay, you know, in the Upanishads also there is a mantra in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Yat kratur bhavati, tat kratur bhavati, tat karma kurute, or something like that. Yeah, I'll look for that mantra. Yat karma kurute, tat kratur bhavati, I don't get the exact mantra, but there is a similar mantra which says that what desires you have, that desire drives your action, and that action that you perform guides your next janma. That is the meaning of that mantra in the Upanishad. So something similar here the Acharya is giving through the Kitaka example, that the wasp and worm example. So this whole mantra, this whole shloka is to say that exactly like how the worm becomes a wasp by constant meditation on the wasp, the sadhaka can transform himself into Brahman by indulging or involving in this nirvikalpa samadhi based meditation which is centered on Brahman. So sati sakto naraha. Sati here means Brahmani. Sat here means Brahman. Saktaha means engrossed in. So sati sakto naraha means a person who is engrossed in Brahman related thoughts. How do you do that? Through the nirvikalpa samadhi meditation. Yeah, yati sadbhavam hi ekanishtaya. So the word ekanishtaya means practicing the nididhyasanam using nirvikalpa samadhi method. Reference previous 2-3 shlokas, 357, 356 and all that. We talked about how to do nirvikalpa samadhi. So that is here given the word ekanishtaya. Ekanishtaya means single pointed concentration. That is ekanishta. Okay. Sadbhavam yati means he eventually becomes of the nature of Brahman. Okay. Second line is the example. Kitako bhramaram dhyayan brahmaratvaya kalpate. Exactly like how a worm becomes a wasp by thinking about the wasp. Okay. So the exact mechanism we will see a little more elaborately in the next shloka. But here I want to do a small digression and give you some, subtle logic which we, use in some other context. But I thought this is related to this shloka. I'll bring it here. Okay. Now, how do you become that thing by thinking about that thing? Is it really possible? That is the question. No, here we say that you keep on thinking about Brahman, keep on meditating about Brahman, you become Brahman. Okay. How is that possible? Anybody?
Because your mind programs everything.
Okay, let me put the question. Put the question differently. Okay, let's say you want a lot of fame. You want a lot of fame. You keep on imagining that you are famous. You are famous. Will you become famous?
The thought process, it'll, what to say, in Tamil we say ganam serpadu. Like there is a proverb like நீ எதை நினைக்கின்றாயோ நீ அதுவாகவே ஆகிறாய். Whatever you think, you become that.
Correct.
So how you become is because that's a layer and layer and layer of thoughts. Waves come and then it makes it happen. Actually, it'll create a kind of it is actually a kind of mirror that is reflecting.
No. All that you say is correct, but I am asking a very specific question. Will the thought alone make you achieve that, because
No.
at
If it's
some point the thought has to transform into action.
Yes.
yeah,
Okay.
there should be the blessing of God.
Yeah.
And this, if the thought is a single thought, and if it is stressed in that level, then this will happen.
No. All that is good. See, what you are saying is your thought is important. But what I'm saying is that the thought alone will not get you the result. It has to somewhere become transform into action, and that action is
Executed.
what gets you. So the immediate cause of your achieving is not the thought. The thought is a trigger. The thought is a trigger, but then that it triggers a chain of events which eventually makes you achieve the goal. Let's say I want to become a tennis player, and daily I sit in meditation for 20 minutes and say I am a tennis champion. I'm a tennis champion. Will I become a tennis champion? No, because to become a tennis champion, unless I take a tennis racket and go to the tennis court and play tennis, I cannot become a champion. So the thought is important but not sufficient. Okay, it's a necessary but not sufficient condition. Look, if I don't want to play tennis at all, then there is no way I'm going to take a tennis racket and go and play tennis. Okay, so
Okay,
that thought or desire to become a tennis champion is the starting point. I agree. So there the thought has a role, but the thought alone will not make me a tennis champion or golf champion or whatever. Whatever I want to achieve, I must go and perform some action. But in the case of Brahman, there is no action specified. It says you simply sit in meditation, you will become Brahman.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what we say is, if you are not Brahman, if you are not Brahman is a fact, any amount of thinking will not make you Brahman. That is a catch.
Yeah, because you are Brahman, it is only to say that you have to take the veils away. Okay, fine.
Correct. So if the fact is that you are not Brahman, any amount of meditation cannot make you Brahman. So because your true nature is Brahman, but you are not aware of it, the act of meditation dispels that illusion that you are not Brahman. That is the way you have to understand this whole meditation process. So the meditation doesn't make you Brahman. The meditation removes that misconception in your mind that you are not Brahman. Abrahmatva nivritti is what the word we use. No, Brahmatva prapti is nothing but Abrahmatva nivritti. Removal of the misconception that I am not Brahman. That is what meditation achieves. Okay, that is the subtle point I wanted to introduce.
So in the Triputi, already we have the doer alone and we don't have the other two.
No. You have the thought alone, not the doer is also gone. The
doer is also gone, right?
The thinking process is gone. Or the meditator is gone, the meditation is gone. The meditated object alone remains. That is the nirvikalpa part.
Right.
But this, I'm telling this because one has to understand that through this meditation, don't expect some new experience. You are not going to get any sudden new experience. So that expectation of some unique experience also has to be dropped. It is just to remind you and to make it very conscious that your true nature is nothing but Brahman. That has to be anchored in your mind. That is the whole idea of meditation.
Right.
Okay. Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone? Can we move on? Next sloka. Okay. So,
Yes, sir, we can move on.
359. Kriyantara saktim
Kriyantara
Kriyantara Sakti
Apasya Kitakaha
Apasya
Pasyatikaha
ततः
Dhyayan Alitvam
Dhyayan alitvam
धायन् अदित्वम्
Alitvam
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 Chalibhavam Richati.
yalibhavam
Yalibhava
richati.
Tathaiva Yogi
Tathaiva yogi
तथैव योगी
Paramatma Tattvam
paramattvam
तत्त्वं
Dhyatva Samayati
jyatva samayati
वा समायाति
Tadeka Nishtaya.
sadeka nishtaya.
तनिष्ठया.
So, Kriyantara Asaktim Apasya Kitakaha. So, this first two lines is about that worm and wasp example. The next two lines is about the Vedantic seeker. So, first we will see the example part. Kitakaha, the worm, Kriyantara Saktim Apasya. So, Kriyantara Sakti means, imagine before the wasp captured that worm, the worm was busy doing some activity. You know, it had some agenda. It had some meeting at 8 o'clock, another meeting at 10 o'clock, and all that. And suddenly it got captured by the wasp. Now, under the captivity of the worm, under the captivity of the wasp, the worm has to drop all its plans. Whatever plans it had for the day or for the rest of the life, it had to drop, because there is no way it's going to do anything else other than suffer this series of stinging from the wasp. That is the dropping. So, Kriyantara Sakti means all the activities, all the plans that one might have, all the other busy things in life. Apasya means to drop. So, just like how the worm is held in a place, constrained in a place with no other activity, but the only thing it does is to think about the wasp. So, Dhyayan Alitvam. Dhyayan means by meditating. Meditating means it is always thinking of the wasp. Not that it is doing some samadhi meditation or anything, but it has nothing else to do. It is only thinking about the wasp all the time. When will it sting me next? You know, Alitvam Helibhavam Richati. Alibhavam, Ali here means the wasp. Ali is the same as Brahmara. Ali and Brahmara are synonymous. So, Alitvam is the nature of being the Ali. That is the nature of being the wasp. Alibhavam Richati. It becomes the wasp eventually. It acquires the nature of the wasp. That is the example part, which we already saw for the previous shloka. Similarly, Tathaiva, in the same manner, Yogi is the Nididhyasaka, one who is now doing the meditation. Paramatma Tattvam Dhyatva. By thinking about the Paramatma, which is Brahman, Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, Dhyatva, by meditating, Samayati Tad Ekanishtaya. Ekanishtaya means by practicing the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. We saw in the previous shloka also, 358, first line, last word is Ekanishtaya. That Ekanishtaya is repeated here. That is your Nirvikalpa Samadhi practice. Samayati means acquires or attains. So the meditator, the Nirvikalpa Samadhi Nididhyasaka also acquires Brahmanhood, Brahmatvam, by practicing the Nirvikalpa Samadhi, exactly like how the worm becomes a wasp, by simply meditating. And as I said, you become Brahman. Not really speaking, you become Brahman. You realize that you were Brahman all the time, and now you know that you are Brahman. You know, for this only, the Puranas also, there are a lot of stories which have this kind of a message hidden in it. And the most famous of the stories is that of Karna. You know, Karna in Mahabharata was actually Kunti's son. So he is basically a Kshatriya. But he doesn't know that. So he was brought up by a charioteer. And the charioteer name was Radha or something. So he was always called Radheya. Radheya means son of Radha. Okay, so he always had this inferiority complex that I am not a Kshatriya. And that's why even Arjuna at one point refuses to fight Karna, because he says, I'll only fight with Kshatriyas. And you are a Sutaputra. Sutaputra means a charioteer's son. So all his life, Karna carries this inferiority complex that I am not a Kshatriya, I am not a Kshatriya. And then just before the Mahabharata battle, Kunti comes and meets him alone and asks him, she tells all the story. She tells Karna that, hey Karna, you are actually my son. And at first he doesn't believe. He thinks, it is some kind of a conspiracy that Kunti is trying to hatch to protect the Pandavas. Then she gives all the complete story and Karna is convinced. And then she says, okay, you should only fight Arjuna, you should spare the other 4 brothers. So you should not fight, either Yudhishthira or Bhima or Nakula or Sahadeva, because Arjuna is your only equal, you should only fight Arjuna, nobody else. So that boon she gets from Karna. Now come to Karna. Did Karna become a Kshatriya?
No.
He was already one.
Yeah. So he was already a Kshatriya, he was always a Kshatriya, but he didn't know that. And all that Kunti did was to give him the truth about his true nature, and now he knows he is Kshatriya. That is actually a kind of a message for the Vedantic seekers that, look, you think you are a human being, but really speaking, you are not a human being. That human body is an incidental thing in you. You are really Brahman. That message is given through this Karna story. Yeah. So this whole idea of meditation, you should, combine all these inputs and know that it is to remove your wrong notion that you are not Brahman. That is the whole point. Okay. 359 is done. Can we go to 360?
Yes,
Yes.
sir.
Yeah. Right. Ativa Sukshmam
Ativa
Ativa Sukshmam
Paramatma Tattvam
Paramatma
Paramatma Tattvam
Na Sthula Drishtya
na Sthula Drishtya
Drishtya
Pratipattum Arhati
Pratipattum Arhati
Pratipadhi
Samadhina
Samadhina
Atyanta Susukshma Vrittya
Atyanta Sukshma Vittya
Jnatavyam Aryaihi
Jnatavyam Aryaihi
Ati Shuddha Buddhibhihi
Ati
Shuddha
Buddhi
Ativa Sukshmam Paramatma Tattvam Na Sthula Drishtya Pratipattum Arhati Samadhinatyanta Susukshma Vrittya Jnatavyam Aryair Ati Shuddha Buddhibhihi. Okay, so Paramatma Tattvam Ativa Sukshmam. Sukshmam means very, very subtle. Very, very subtle. In the sense, when we say something is subtle or something is gross, it can be seen from different perspectives. For instance, we can say that, the brick is a gross manifestation of the sand, which is a very subtle entity. So that grossness and subtleness can be in terms of size. And when you talk of the electron, proton, neutron, they are even more subtle compared to the sand particle, which then becomes gross. So the grossness and subtleness is a relative term. So when you compare two things, which one could be gross, other could be subtle, but in comparison with something else, that subtle thing itself could become gross. Okay, that is one way of looking at the subtle and gross thing. The other is in terms of concept. When we say concept, let's say there is a story and there is a message in the story. So it is easy to remember the story. because the story is, a sequence of events. There are people coming and going, and the story can be easily narrated. But to express the message that the story carries, that's a subtler aspect. Okay, so the subtlety is to, in terms of your understanding, there could be the story. Grasping the story is a gross thing, but grasping the message of the story is a subtle thing. Okay, and then we also have a third way of defining. The subtle entity is more pervasive than the gross entity. The subtle entity is more pervasive than the gross entity. Okay, so like, if you take our body itself, the gross body, the Annamaya Kosha, has a certain limit, but the mind that operates within the body is very subtle. It is not visible to your eyes, and the mind is capable of traveling outside the body also, and it pervades the whole body also. So in that sense, the body and the mind, the body is gross, the mind is subtle. Okay, but when you compare the mind with consciousness, consciousness is even more subtle, because consciousness pervades the mind also. Okay, so am I getting my point across? Are you able to follow me?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yes.
what
Yes.
the Acharya wants to say is that when you talk about the consciousness, it is very difficult to point out with a finger and say this is consciousness, because the consciousness is a very, very subtle subject. It has to be understood with a very sharp intellect, which is capable of having a sukshma vritti. That is the point this sloka is making. Okay, and from the scientific world, I'll give an example which many of you can relate to. No, so if I want to measure the width of a tennis court or a football field, I will have a measuring tape, and the measuring tape will have meter and centimeter and maybe millimeters marked in it. Okay, so that measuring tape is good enough to measure the dimension of a tennis court or a football field. But if I have to measure the size of an electron or a proton or a photon, I cannot do it with a measuring tape, because the measuring tape is a gross entity. The electron or proton or photon that I am trying to measure is so subtle that I need a subtler measuring instrument to measure the size of the neutron or proton. Can you follow this example?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So, like that, to follow the teaching about consciousness, which is a very, very subtle subject, the level of thoughts that your mind generates through which you understand this consciousness should also be very subtle. So the mind has to be capable of grasping the subtlety of the subject through the subtle thought process. That is the sukshma drishtya. The Acharya uses two words here. Sthula drishti, you see in the second line. Na sthula drishtya pratipattum arhati. Pratipatti means understanding, comprehension. Okay, so ativa sukshmam paramatma tattvam. So Paramatma, the consciousness, the Brahman, is a very subtle subject, ativa sukshmam, and that cannot be understood by someone whose thought process is gross. Na sthula drishtya pratipattum arhati. Arhati means capable of. You are not qualified to understand if your thought process remains stuck at the gross level. That is a sthula drishti, means your thought process is not subtle, it is gross. Okay. So what this implies is, when people normally go through Shravanam and Mananam, they are expected to employ their Sukshma Vritti or the subtle thought process by paying extremely careful attention, but very often during Shravanam and Mananam, that doesn't happen. So they listen with a semi-focused mind, with a lot of other things roaming around in their thoughts. So they are half listening here and half thinking something else. So that subtle thought process is not fully available to capture the teaching coming from the teacher, from the guru, which is why you later have to go through an nididhyasanam process where you employ this subtle thought process, because in the samadhi state your thought process becomes very subtle, and in that subtle state of the mind you are now repeating the teaching which you had gathered in the Shravanam stage with a gross thought process. I'll pause here and find out, if you have a difficulty following this, should I repeat anything or should I explain something differently?
No, you have really explained it very well. What we need is to do nididhyasanam.
Oh, okay. Okay.
To
So,
internalize. Explanation is perfect.
right. So, the third line says, Samadhina atyanta sukshma vrittya. So, in the samadhi state, your thought process becomes extremely subtle, and in that subtle state of mind, Jnatavyam aryaihi ati shuddha buddhibhihi. So, you have to regurgitate or recollect the teaching. Regurgitation is actually a good word, because regurgitation means what? You have eaten something, but then it is like the cow chewing cud,
Yeah.
they call it. Cow eats the food in a hurry, and then it can sit somewhere in the stomach, and then later on, Ram say, when it has a lot of time in the world, it will pull the food, that semi-chewed food, it will pull out from the stomach and then finish the rest of the chewing and send it for digestion. So like that, you have to regurgitate and recollect the teaching which you have acquired in the Shravanam phase, but which unfortunately was not accompanied with a subtle thought process. You now employ the subtle thought process in that state of samadhi to figure out the teaching and to absorb it completely. So, Jnatavyam aryaihi ati shuddha buddhibhihi. So, this ati shuddha buddhi here refers to that calm state of mind which you reach when you are in that samadhi state. Ati shuddha buddhi here refers to that extremely calm state. You have no other thoughts in the mind. The only thought that you have is this mantra, aham brahmasmi, aham shuddhosmi, buddhosmi. All those teachings you entertain, and that is the only thought, and nothing else is there. So you are able to absorb the teaching more effectively. That is the intention of this samadhi abhyasa, which is 360. Okay. All good? Can we move on?
Yeah.
It's all good, sir. It's again, I think that what you said with that
Ekanishta.
Ekanishta, now with the same, I mean, there's only this thought of Brahman there, which is then that which is making the buddhi suddhi, and we don't have any other thought, which means it has been cleansified, probably. Yeah. Okay, sir. I got you.
Great. So 361. Yatha suvarnam
Yatha suvarnam
Yatha swarnam
putapaka shodhitam
Puttapaka shobhitam
tektva malam
Tyaktva malam
swatmagunam samrichati
Swatmagunam samruchati
samrichati.
tatha manaha
Tatha manaha
sattva rajas tamo malam
Sattva rajas tamo malam
dhyanena santyajya
dhyanena santyajya
Sameti Tattvam.
Sameti Tattvam.
Tattvam.
Yatha Suvarnam Putapaka Shodhitam Tyaktva Malam Swatmagunam Samrichati Tatha Manah Sattva Tamomalam Dhyanena Santyajya Sameti Tattvam. Okay, so here the example is a new example, a different example. Here the Acharya talks about how the goldsmith purifies the gold. The goldsmith has a piece of gold, maybe it is some kind of a gold ore or gold which is not completely refined or whatever. So he is trying to recover the gold from that material. Generally what they do with all the metals is, whether it is gold or silver or whatever, copper, even iron for that matter, it is put in a crucible and it is heated to a very high temperature. And depending on the metal, the temperature could be 1000, 1400, 1700, whatever degrees. Basically, iron requires an extremely high temperature. Iron melts around 1800 or 1850 degrees. Okay, whereas gold doesn't require that high, to melt it. It will probably melt at 1200 degrees. Okay, so it's a lower temperature, but still 1200 degrees is a lot of temperature. And they put this in the crucible and then they add some chemicals which is called flux, and the chemicals will then mix with the impurities and it will come out on top, which is called slag. And then in that liquid state the slag will be easy to remove, and then once they have done this process a few times, then the pure gold remains, and the pure gold then shines. When the gold piece before purification, if you look at it, it will not have that shine because of the presence of impurities. Now after the impurities have been removed, there is no new shine that gets introduced. It is the same shine which was available but hidden because of impurities. You remove the impurities and the shine emerges. So it is the manifestation of a shine or luster that was always there, but it was obstructed. So that is the idea here. So yatha suvarnam, yatha means in, just like suvarnam is gold, puta paka shodhitam. Puta is a crucible. Pakam means to cook. Cook means here to heat. Shodhitam is to purify. So puta paka shodhitam means that which has been refined and cleansed of impurities by putting it through the smelting process. Tyaktva malam, malam tyaktva, malam is impurity. Tyaktva means by getting rid of. Svatma gunam samrichati. It manages to exhibit its true nature, which is a shine, which is a luster. So Swatma Gunam Samrichati, it acquires, within quotes, it doesn't acquire the shine. It simply manages to give out that shine which it anyway has had. So that is the first two lines, is a gold example. Then we come to the third and fourth line, Tatha, in that manner, Manaha, our mind, Sattva Rajas Tamo Malam Dhyanena Santyajya. So our mind basically has all the three gunas. It has some amount of sattva guna, some amount of rajoguna, some amount of tamoguna. And in the Vedantic parlance, even sattva guna is an impurity. It is also an impurity. And what is the manifestation of a sattva impurity? The manifestation of a sattva impurity is the thought that I am a jnani. If you are obsessed with being a jnani, that is a sattva impurity, because really speaking, that jnanam belongs to the mind, the knowledge part of the jnanam, not the awareness part. We use the word jnanam in two senses. We use the jnanam in the sense of awareness, which is actually the property of Atma. But the jnanam, which is the knowledge, objective knowledge, is a property of the mind. But when you say I am a jnani, you are actually identifying with your mind and not with your Atma. So, I am a jnani is also an impurity of the sattva variety. That also has to be dropped. And tamo malam is all these laziness and everything, the procrastination and all that is tamo malam. Rajo malam is to indulge in so much of external activities. All this, what does sattva guna do? What does rajo guna do? What does tamo guna do? All this is very, very beautifully explained in the 14th chapter in 20 shlokas. Not exactly 20, maybe 17, 18 shlokas. The last two shlokas are not guna, but gunatitam. So the first 18 shlokas of the 14th chapter of Bhagavad Gita gives you a complete idea about how the sattva, rajas, tamo gunas behave. And in this shloka, the Acharya says, your mind has to get rid of all these three impurities by going through this meditation. Dhyanena santyajya. Santyajya means to completely get rid of. And getting rid of doesn't mean it vanishes tomorrow. No. Getting rid of means to consciously tell yourself that these are not my real properties. These belong to the mind, and therefore I have nothing to do with my knowledge also. I am Brahman. There is a Manisha Panchakam Shlokam that Acharya has written. There one line comes, Brahmaiva na Brahmavit. No, Brahmaiva na Brahmavit means I am Brahman and not one who knows Brahman. Brahmavit means one who knows Brahman. I am not the one who knows Brahman, but I am Brahman myself. So that is the idea here. So the mind has to then say, look, knowledge is there, but the knowledge belongs to the mind, and my nature is Brahman, Chaitanyam, consciousness. So sameti tattvam. Tattvam is that reality. Reality as in true nature. Swarupam. Tattvam here should be understood as Swarupam. Swarupam is true nature. So by this meditation process, one owns up with one's own true nature. One identifies oneself with one's true nature by dropping all the misidentifications. So that is 361. Okay. Any more explanation is needed?
This was good, sir.
Okay. So then we will close for today. We are just 1 minute away from 9 o'clock. So, and one more shloka means it will take another minimum 10 minutes. Yeah. So anybody wants to discuss anything? No? Okay. Then we'll chant the shlokas, and like last week, after the chanting, please switch off the recording. I'll need a minute. Yeah. Okay. Right. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vasishyate Sarvesham Swastirбhavatu Sarvesham Shantirbhavatu Sarvesham Purnam Bhavatu Sarvesham Mangalam Bhavatu Sarvepi Sukhinas Santu Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschit Dukkha Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Okay. So can you please